The beeping was the only sound I remember. Not voices. Not footsteps. Just that steady, mechanical beeping that told me I was still alive. Even though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to be, I had been standing in the pew at St. Hippolyte's, Andrews Presbyterian, the same church I had attended every Sunday for 31 years. The November light was coming through the stained glass, the way it always does in Ontario, pale and thin, like it was apologizing for not being warmer. Pastor Hendricks was mid-sentence when the floor came up to meet me. That's the last thing I remember before the beeping. The floor, and the way the light looked through that blue and gold glass. My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old. I taught grade 4 at Lakeview Elementary in Burlington for 28 years before I retired. I raised one son. On me own. After my husband Gerald passed from cancer when our boy was only 11, I gave that child everything I had. Everything. His name is Daniel. And when I was lying on that cold hospital floor at St. Tammy, Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton, the paramedics cutting open my blouse and the defibrillator pads being pressed against my chest. Daniel was 312 kilometers away in Montreal. I know the exact distance because I looked it up later. Lying in that hospital bed with nothing but time and a phone I could barely hold with my left hand, the doctor, a young woman named Dr. Patel, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner I immediately respected, told me afterward that I had suffered a major cardiac event. A heart attack. Plain and simple. She said my heart had gone into arrhythmia during the service, and that if the woman sitting beside me, a retired nurse named Beverly, hadn't started chest compressions immediately, things would have gone very differently. Beverly. I had sat beside her exactly twice before that Sunday. She barely knew my name. Dr. Patel also told me something else. She told me that her team had attempted to contact my son Daniel, beginning at 11:47 inches the morning. They called his cell phone. They called the number I had listed as his work. They left voicemails. They sent texts through the hospital's automated system. They tried to reach him 31 times before I regained consciousness. 31 times. He didn't answer once. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. Because I had to. 31. Not once or twice. The way you might miss a call when you're in a meeting or in the shower. 31 attempts. My heart had stopped beating in a church pew. And the person I had listed as the one person who should know the person I had driven to hockey practice at 5 in the morning. The person I had worked double report card seasons to put through university at McMaster. The person I had given the down payment for his first condo in Westmount. That person could not be reached 31 times while I was on a ventilator. The first face I saw when I opened my eyes was not Daniel's. It was Beverly's. She was sitting in the chair beside my bed with a Tim Hortons coffee going cold on the side table. And she had been there for 6 hours. She told me she had gone home only once. To feed her cat. And then came straight back. She held my hand and didn't say anything dramatic. She just said, "There you are." I cried. I don't cry easily. I hadn't cried since Gerald's funeral. But something about those 2 words from a woman who owed me absolutely nothing broke something open in me. "Has my son been reached?" I asked Dr. Patel when she came in that evening. She looked at her chart and then looked at me with an expression I can only describe as carefully neutral. "We've made multiple attempts," she said. "We haven't been able to make contact." I nodded. I looked at the ceiling. I said, "I see." That was day 1. On day 2, a woman from the hospital's patient services department came to speak with me about discharge planning and support at home. She asked if I had family who could assist. I told her I had a son. She asked if he had been in touch. I told her he had not. She wrote something on her clipboard and moved on efficiently. The way people in those roles learn to do. Because my situation was, I would come to understand. Not unusual. It was Beverly who stayed again that night. She brought me a container of her homemade butter chicken, which was against hospital policy and which I ate every single bite of. She sat across from me, and we talked about her late husband. About my Gerald. About what it meant to get older in this country, when the people you thought would be there simply weren't. She didn't say anything unkind about Daniel. She didn't have to. It was on day 2 that I asked a nurse to help me find Daniel's Instagram. I am not someone who uses social media. I have a Facebook account that I created in 2014 and have logged into perhaps 11 times. But I knew Daniel was active on Instagram because he had shown me photos from it at Thanksgiving, photos of restaurants and what he called experiences, and his girlfriend, a woman named Kristen, who had never once looked me in the eye for longer than 3 seconds. His account was public. The most recent post was from the previous night, 11:43 p.m. A photo of a table set with white linen and wine glasses. A plate of something architectural that cost more than my grocery budget for a week. Location tag Tokay. Montreal. Caption: good food. Good company. No distractions. No distractions. I read that caption 4 times. I put the phone face down on the blanket. I looked at the window. Outside. The November sky was doing what Ontario November skies do: gray. Flat. Indifferent. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth the way the cardiac nurse had shown me. I did not call Daniel. I did not text him. I did not cry. I made a decision in that moment. Quietly and completely. The way you make the most important decisions of your life, not with shouting or tears, but with a kind of cold, clear certainty that settles into your bones. I would say nothing. Not yet. Daniel called on day 3. At 4:17 inches the afternoon, 2 days, and 4 hours after my heart stopped in a church pew. My son called my cell phone. I looked at his name on the screen for 3 full rings. Then I answered, "Mum." His voice was the voice of someone who has just been told something inconvenient. Not frightened. Not devastated. Inconvenienced. I just saw all the missed calls. What happened? I had a heart attack. I said, "Silence." Then are you okay? I'm in hospital. I said, "I've been here since Sunday morning." Another silence. Sunday. It's Tuesday. Mum. Yes. I said, "It is. I didn't have my phone on me. We were doing this whole digital detox thing. Kristen read about it." "You put your phones in a box for the weekend, Daniel?" I said. He stopped. "I'm very tired." I said, "I'll call you when I'm home." And I ended the call. I want to be honest about something. In the days that followed, the 5 days I spent in that hospital, and the 2 weeks after when Beverly drove me to my follow-up appointments and brought groceries and sat with me while I did the cardiac rehabilitation exercises, the physiotherapist had assigned, I went through something I can only describe as a reckoning. Not with Daniel. With myself. I thought about all the times I had made excuses for him. The Christmas, he didn't come home because of a work thing that turned out to be a ski trip to Whistler. The year I had my hip replaced, and he sent flowers, from an app. The kind where the delivery person leaves them on the doorstep instead of coming. The calls that went to voicemail. The texts that got one-word replies days later. The Thanksgiving he brought Kristen for the first time, and she spent the entire meal on her phone while I cooked the turkey I had been marinating since the Friday before. I had told myself, each time, that he was busy. That this was what modern life looked like. That I shouldn't need so much. Lying in that hospital bed, I understood something I had been refusing to understand for years. I had not been asking for too much. I had been asking someone who had decided, somewhere along the way, that I did not matter enough. That is a hard thing to know about your own child. I won't pretend it isn't. Daniel drove down from Montreal the Saturday after I was discharged. He arrived at my house in Burlington with a bouquet of grocery store flowers, yellow chrysanthemums, the kind you buy at a Loblaws checkout, and a box of Timbits. He looked well. He looked tanned. Actually, which I thought about more than I should have, he sat at my kitchen table and told me he was sorry. He told me the digital detox had been Kristen's idea and that he should have kept his phone for emergencies. He said he hadn't known it was that serious. As though a cardiac event becomes more or less serious depending on whether someone decides to know about it. I poured us each a tea and I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not cry. I had cried all I needed to cry in that hospital room, alone, on day one, before I made my decision. When he finished, I said, "I appreciate you coming." He looked relieved. He started to say something about coming more often, about making more of an effort, Daniel. I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen." He nodded. "When your father died," I said, "I was 39 years old. I had a mortgage on this house, a grade 4 classroom, and an 11-year-old boy. There was no life insurance. There was no family money. There was just me." I looked at him. I worked. I saved. I went without things so you wouldn't have to. I paid for your university. I gave you $60,000 toward your condo. Money I had saved over 20 years. Money your father and I had planned to use to travel when we retired. Daniel was quiet. "I am not angry," I said. And I meant it. "But I am finished pretending that what happened last week was acceptable. I am finished pretending that a great many things over the past several years have been acceptable. I love you. You are my son. But I am 67 years old and I had a heart attack and the hospital could not reach you 31 times. And you were eating a $400 dinner with a location tag." He didn't deny it. "At least there was that. I have an appointment with my financial advisor next week." I said, "I have an appointment with a lawyer the week after. I want you to understand that I will be making changes." He asked what kind of changes. "The kind that reflect reality." I said. He left an hour later. He hugged me at the door. Stiffly. The way you hug someone you're not sure about anymore. I watched his car pull out of the driveway and I stood in my front doorway for a long time after, looking at the bare November maple on my front lawn, its branches clean and dark against the white sky. I did not feel the way I expected to feel. I expected grief. Instead, I felt something quieter. Something almost like relief. This is the part where I tell you about Patricia. Patricia had been my next-door neighbor for 11 years. She was 44, recently divorced, and had 2 teenagers who were, in her words, doing their level best to age me rapidly. We had one of those neighborly relationships that stays pleasant and somewhat surface level for years. Borrowing the odd cup of something, waving from driveways, chatting over the fence about the city's snow removal schedule. The day I came home from the hospital, there was a pot of soup on my porch. Chicken and rice. Homemade. With a note in Patricia's handwriting, "Heard you were under the weather. No need to thank me. Just eat." The next day there was a second note, asking if she could drive me anywhere. The day after that, she knocked and asked if she could come in and help me sort through what the hospital discharge nurse had called my medication schedule, which was, to be honest, overwhelming for someone who had previously taken nothing stronger than the odd Tylenol. I lit her in. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had sat with Daniel. She looked at every prescription bottle carefully and made a chart on a piece of paper in her precise schoolteacher's printing. She put it on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a loon. Over the following weeks, Patricia became the person I hadn't known I needed. She drove me to my cardiologist. She walked with me each day for the 30 minutes the rehabilitation team required slowly around the neighborhood, in our winter coats, talking about everything and nothing. She brought her daughter over one afternoon to help me reorganize my kitchen so that nothing I needed regularly was on a high shelf anymore. She did not make any of this feel like charity. She made it feel like what it was one person deciding that another person mattered. There was an evening in early December when we were sitting in my living room after our walk, warming up with tea. And she said something I haven't stopped thinking about. She said, "You know what I've learned since my divorce? That family isn't always the people who share your DNA. Sometimes it's the people who show up." I looked at her over my mug. "When did you get so wise?" She laughed. "I've had a very educational few years. I called my lawyer a woman named Susan Beaumont, who had handled my will when I first retired, and I made an appointment. We updated my documents. I won't go into the specific details because they are private. But I will say that my estate no longer reflects assumptions I made 10 years ago about who would be there for me. It reflects what I now know to be true. I also called my financial advisor and restructured my RRSP beneficiary designations and the beneficiary on my TFSA. In Canada, these are not part of your estate. They pass directly outside the will, so it was important to address them separately. My advisor, a patient man who had been managing my retirement savings for 15 years, did not ask me why I was making these changes. He simply made them. I was grateful for his discretion. The total value of those accounts, plus the proceeds from the eventual sale of my house, represents the savings of a 30-year teaching career and decades of careful, quiet living. It is not a small amount. It is not an amount that should go to someone who couldn't be reached 31 times. In January, I booked a trip. I had always wanted to see the Canadian Maritimes in winter. People think you're strange when you say that everyone goes in summer for the lobster and the warmth, but I had read once about the way the Bay of Fundy looks in January. The ice formations at Hopewell Rocks. The emptiness of the coastline when the tourists are gone. Gerald and I had always said we'd go. We never did. I asked Patricia if she wanted to come. She said yes before I finished the sentence. We flew into Halifax on a Thursday morning in late January. It was -12 and brilliantly sunny. We drove a rented Subaru along the shore road toward Peggy's Cove, and the sea was this impossible dark blue against the snow-covered rocks. And I sat in the passenger seat and felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, genuinely, purely happy. Not content. Not fine. Happy. Beverly had also given me something before I left. A small card. The kind you get at a Christian bookshop, with a verse on the inside that she had underlined. She is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. I put it in the pocket of my winter coat, and I read it every morning of that trip. My phone rang on the third day we were in New Brunswick. I was standing on the boardwalk at Hopewell Rocks, looking at the frozen formations below, when I felt it vibrate. It was Daniel. Patricia was a few steps away, taking a photo. I looked at his name on the screen. He called 3 times in a row, the way you do when something is urgent. I let it go to voicemail. When we got back to the car and the heat was running, I listened to the message. His voice was tight, different from the last time. He said he had spoken to someone I don't know who. Perhaps a relative. Perhaps Kristen's family, and he had found out that I had changed my will. He said he needed to talk to me. He said this wasn't fair, that he was still my son, that whatever had happened at the hospital had been a mistake. He said Kristen had been the one who insisted on the digital detox and that he had trusted her, that he hadn't known. I deleted the message. Patricia looked at me. I looked at the frozen bay through the windshield. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it completely. I want to say something to whoever is listening to this, because I know some of you have lived some version of this story. Maybe it was a different medical emergency. Maybe it was a different betrayal. A different kind of absence. Maybe your child or your sibling or someone you had loved and sacrificed for showed you, in a single moment or in 1,000 small moments, that you had been making yourself smaller so they didn't have to feel uncomfortable. Here is what I know now. At 67, standing on a frozen boardwalk in New Brunswick with a friend who showed up for no reason except that she was a decent person, you are allowed to change. You are allowed to look at your life clearly and rearrange it to match what you now understand to be true. You are allowed to stop waiting for an apology that will never come in the form you need it. You are allowed to take the money you saved over 30 years and spend it on a trip with someone who walked with you every single day while you were recovering, who made a medication chart and put it on your fridge with a loon magnet. You are not obligated to leave your inheritance to someone who treated your survival as an inconvenience. And you are not cold for feeling as I did on that boardwalk. With the January wind coming off the Bay of Fundy and Patricia laughing at something on her camera roll beside me, you are not cold for feeling. In the place where grief used to live. Something clean and open and entirely slash and now. Unexpectedly free. I kept every dollar. I spent 2 weeks on the most beautiful coastline in the world. I came home to a house that felt, for the first time in years, like mine. And when the maple in my front yard bloomed the following April, the first April I had ever really noticed it, the first spring I had ever watched arrive as though it was a gift being given specifically to me, I stood at my kitchen window with my morning tea and I thought about Beverly's verse, the one she had underlined, strength and dignity, and laughing without fear of the future, that is, at 67 years old. And after everything, exactly where I am.